Often when I'm asked to do a talk about anything to do with Western desert art, I love to go into the history and the social history and the art history and the movements many years. And today is a bit different because this exhibition is called Field of Vision. And the curator, in his opening address the other evening, invited us very strongly to focus on the paintings. Vision, field of vision. Let's look at the paintings, was his big invitation. So today I've got, rather than a kind of a formal address in a sense, hopefully it's a lot more informal, and I've got, I think, about 6 stories or so to share with you. And those stories relate to some paintings that are here and the artists who made them. The first painting I want to talk about is this one. I'm going to stand there so you can see what I'm talking about. This painting by Mick Namarari, who's an artist from Kurikura, done in 2005. So here's my story. When I first saw the painting, it was at Papunya Tula's annual exhibition in 2005 in their gallery in the mall in Alice Springs. So Papunya Tula, for those who don't know, we might refer to it as an art centre. It's the company set up by Aboriginal artists in the Western Desert in 1972, so it's just celebrated its 50th year. And they have an annual show mainly for the people in Alice Springs so they can come and see some of the main artists and emerging artists who've been working that year, because people in the cities get to see the exhibition, so their thing is, well, we need to do something for the locals in Alice as well. The way the exhibition works in Alice Springs is the gallery has very big wall-to-ceiling external glass windows, and you can just walk past day or night and look in and see all the art that's on display. When it comes to their annual show, what happened some years before that was that they put up the annual show and you could look through the window and see what's there, and people would be lining up at the windows thinking, all right, well, as soon as this opens tonight, I'm going to get that one and that one and that one, because the big collectors were turning up from the city and grabbing paintings, and locals were missing out. So what they did was they came up with a new system. On the day that the exhibition was hung, they would cover the windows with black plastic all around the gallery. Then they'd hang the exhibition. Then they'd have the opening of the exhibition outside in the mall with the formal addresses. There might be people dancing, there might be some singing. And then at the assigned time, the door was flung open and in rushed the crowd. So that was the first thing. The second thing they did was they said, if you're coming to our exhibition and you're wanting to buy something, you can buy one painting. So everyone would run in, rush around, look at everything on display, think, oh, I love that one, or I like that one, or that's by Nata, or I'm looking for one by George, or whatever the situation is. But then you go to the desk that the manager's sitting at and join a long queue of other people with their eye on something, and when you get to the front of the queue, you say, I'd like the painting by George Jungarai. And if it's still available, you could get it. And if it's not, you just missed out. And you could go around again, and then you could join the back of the queue. So when I saw that painting, I just thought immediately, wouldn't I love to have that? So that's one of the things about looking at art is you can have an initial reaction, which is like a gut reaction, an intuitive reaction, an emotional reaction, where as soon as you see it, you just go, I love it. If someone said why, you go, I don't know, I'm not even thinking about why. Sometimes it's just an emotional kind of response to the picture. I love it. And I think the reason I loved it is because it reminded me so much of what I thought of as the desert, the kind of colours of the desert, you know, the orange sand and the yellow flowers and that kind of patchwork quilt of colours, different bushes, different trees, different flowers, different bits of bare ground, different kind of colorations, shadows from the sun, casting patches of darker shadow on the ground. All of those things made me think about that painting of Kim's. So I was intrigued a couple of years ago when I went back to the annual exhibition. 2022 was the 50th anniversary of Papunya Tula. And the artist, Kim Naparula, was there. She'd come in from Kirikura, as many artists do, because it's their annual show. They own the company. And I'd got a photo taken of myself with Kim in front of that painting in 2005 as a memento. And I always like to take photos back when I go out bush, and I send them out to people anyway. But I had the photos with me. So I went down, sat down next to Kim, got the photo out, and I said, you probably don't remember, but back in the day, here's a photograph of you with your painting and myself. And I said to her, the painting makes me think of the desert. You know, I think it's the topography and the colours and the kind of geography of a desert scene. So is that what was in your mind? Were you painting the desert? I was fully expecting her, of course, just to say yes, because I thought I was clever enough to work it out. The answer was no. So she explained to me that the colours, the red and the green, and the red and the orange and the yellow, are the colours associated with women's body paint at the site Marnpi, which is the site that the painting is made for. So Marnpi is a cave site, rockhole site in the desert. It's a special place for women's ceremonies. And when the women do ceremonies, they do body paint, which I'm sure you're aware of. And those three colours were very significant at that site. So she was inspired by women's body paint and obviously her participation in ceremonies, in singing, while she was painting that painting. And that's what drew her to those colours. So one of the things you can look at in any of the paintings today is the colours. Do you react to the colours? How do you react to the colours? Do you think the colours work? Do they work for you? And why might the artist have chosen those colours? That is still one of my personal favourite paintings. Next story, we're up to number 2, is about another artist. In fact, she also lives at Kirikura. And if you can look to your left, you can see a kind of an orangey cream. Is that the right colours? Painting in the corner there. Because I want to tell you about this person. And this is the artist, Yakulchi Napanadi. There's probably something you can't help but notice in the picture with Yakulchi, which is a cat. Not just any cat. That cat's a feral cat. The name of that cat is Lunch. So Yakulchi, here's the story about Yakulchi. In 1788, a little flotilla of ships pulled into this harbour in late January, carrying several boatloads of English people, and they settled here, and you know that story. Gradually, there was contact made with Aboriginal people across the country, around the country. But 196 years after that first fleet arrived in 1788, Yakulchi met her first white people in 1984. So one of the things that tells you is that in the Western Desert, it was one of the most isolated parts of Australia. It's one of the very last places that white people in presence physically arrived. So Yakulchi was part of an extended family group of 9 people. Marnpi Tjapaltjarri, whose black and white painting is on the wall over there, was another member of that group. And they were encountered a year after the Kirikura community was established in 1983. And a group of men were out checking one of the bores, and they suddenly saw, to their astonishment, a naked Aboriginal man with spears looking at them. So that was a bit of a surprise. So the man with the spears, Marnpi, he was about in his early mid-20s, ran away, scared to death by what he'd seen. And some of the men at the community, Matthew Japanati was one, I can't remember the other, they went following the footprints right up to Lake Mackay at Wilkinkara. And they found the group. So Yakulchi was about 9. Her sister, this lady here, Yalti Napanadi, was a little bit younger. And they convinced them to come into the community because the people in that family group had relatives in the community, and so there was a reason to come in and join in with them again. So the thing about Tjapaltjarri is, so she never met white people till she was 9 or 10. So one of the things that she carried through her adulthood and kept practicing was she's now regarded as the cat hunter in Kirikura. She's the queen of cat trackers. The art part of this story is that Tjapaltjarri, with Marnpi and Nangala, who's here, around the corner where I'm pointing, don't need to look, but there's a painting by Doreen Reid Nakamara. Behind you, to your right, single little painting up on the wall, it's a painting by Lorna Napananka. And then the painting I started with, Kim Naparula, and the painting on her left, Yinarupa Nangala. There's this group of women at Kirikura in the early 00s who started this thing. I call them sandhill paintings, and that may or may not be an accurate description. But they started this motif based on very thin, roughly parallel stripes made with a brush. So now we're looking at how does artists get our attention, attract our eye, pull us to the painting. So they used finer and finer brushes rather competitively, like mine's finer than yours. And then they left a space between those roughly parallel lines, and they filled it with dots, and the dots was made with sticks. So if you put little thin sticks into a pot of acrylic, you can get 6 or 8 or 10 little dots out. So each of them had their own dotting technique, each of them had their own line-making technique. Remember when I was in Alice Springs and I was talking to Kim, sitting on the chair next to her was Mantua, and introduced myself to her and started chatting to her as well. And I said, one of her paintings was on show, so I could point to her painting and say, you know, a lot of people admire your paintings very much, Mantua, which she knows and appreciates. And I said, you know, it looks to me like you must do a lot of work in them because, you know, the lines are very narrow and there's so many lines on the canvas. And the dots are so tiny and there's so many dots on the canvas, and the shifts in tone of the dots from a white to a cream to a slightly darker cream to a softer, it's all very subtle. You know, it's very amazing how you can be so patient to produce such an image. She raised her index finger at me and waved my description away as if it was kind of all irrelevant, and just went, she said to me the same word 3 times. Neat, 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 she insisted. Her technique she just encapsulated by that one word, neat. I was intrigued where she got the word from, but neat was her thing. So she knows, you know, none of this is accidental. People know exactly what they're doing. And they've, you know, mature artists over decades of work have refined what they do to produce an image that captures your attention. Because if you think about it, you know, where does your relationship with the artist begin? Well, their relationship with you begins when they finish the last mark on the canvas. Because now the painting's done. They get up and walk away. Your relationship begins when you walk into an exhibition like this and see it for the first time. That's why it's great to kind of have that first reaction. So that's a story about Mantua. Now, where Lorraine's standing, we're going to turn around and look at you now, is a painting by Mick Namarari. And when Christopher Hodges, the curator, was talking about the exhibition the other evening, he emphasised so much of this work is comprised of 2 important elements, lines and dots. You might add some circles in there as well. Lines and dots, but this one hasn't got any lines. When you have a look at it closely, you'll see that it's just dots. And of course, I've looked at a lot of Namarari paintings and become rather infatuated by them. I also had the chance to look at film of him painting, which was quite an insight. When I combined my examination of his painted surfaces, which is my reaction to the marks he's made, with the film of him painting, I was able to put a couple of things together which sound rather obvious now to me, but I hadn't kind of worked it out in advance. Firstly, he's incredibly meticulous. He's obsessively meticulous. He takes ages and ages, days and days and weeks, to make large paintings. And he made these in his 70s. So these are late career works, that example. And it's just dots. Now he's doing those dots with a brush, not a stick. And he can do about 5 or 6 dots per application. Then he would lean back, put the brush into the pot of paint again, flick off any excess. So there was always a spray of paint on the concrete floor in the Papanyathula's painting shed at Kintor, where he loved to paint. And then he would come back to the canvas. And there's a picture in the book, and it looks like he's sitting on the painting with his hat on, finishing the painting. And it's true, he's sitting on the painting, finishing the painting. So Paul Sweeney, who was the field worker there at that time, just as he was finishing, took a photograph. Notice that Namarari still has his hat on. He's not posing, like, hold the brush and pose, which you might expect. He wore his hat inside and out. And then they took the painting outside and leant it against a wall, and Paul, with the other field worker, Wayne, asked Namarari to stand in front of the painting, and they took a photograph. That's the photograph. So the painting and the photograph and the story is all part of Namarari in 1997, painting his work. The next story is the painting by Elizabeth Marks Nakamara, and Elizabeth is Namarari's wife. So she's actually Namarari's second wife. Namarari passed away in 1998, and they had 3 children, and Elizabeth passed away last year. And he used to paint that small mouse story, that little hopping mouse. And that little mouse, Juninpa, used to hop around the desert. When it hopped around the desert, it left little footprints in the sand, like little dots. And it also liked to eat kamparapa, which is a berry that grows on a little bush and looks kind of a bit like a raisin. And those little round berries, there's a picture of them in the book. If you look at the berries, they just look like the dots. And the little mouse's footprints in the sand just looks like little dots in the sand. So Namarari's inspiration for covering his painting with dots was that little mouse, which is part of his, that cultural identity, if we can, leave it that simply. And not that he said much more. I'm not trying to avoid saying anything. I said I don't know anymore. Back to Elizabeth's painting. Now, Elizabeth's painting doesn't look anything like her husband's, we can say that. So we know people are painting their own style uniquely. This painting, what inspired Elizabeth is that it's in relation to a place called Kalipimpa. For those of you quite familiar with Papanyathula art, you'll know the name Johnny Warrangula Djuparula. And Johnny Warrangula Djuparula is one of Elizabeth's fathers. I say one of her fathers because we would call him an uncle because he's the brother of her biological father. But in their culture, your father's brothers are your fathers. So he's a father. So Johnny Warrangula painted a lot of Kalipimpa paintings. And what happened at Kalipimpa in what we call dreaming story or the Jukapa, the law, the kind of cultural foundation of the Pintupi people from time immemorial, was there was a huge storm, like a massive lightning, thunder, hail, just this monstrous storm that came through this area and smashed it. But in the process, it created rock holes, it created landforms, it nurtured the desert with the water, and so that's the kind of life cycle. Now, Elizabeth started painting Kalipimpa, and she'd paint rock holes and circles and sand hills and lines and all those sorts of things. And then she told me when I was talking to her about her painting, she said, I could read this out, but I'll just summarise what she said. She said, I started to think about it a lot. this Kalipimpa place, and thinking about all the things in the story: lightning, hail, thunder, vegetation, water, floods, rock holes, streams, sandhills. And she said, I just wanted to pick one thing, and what she's aiming at here is one thing that she can make her own and set herself apart from other people. And she said she picked the lightning strike. So she said, I made that lightning strike my own, my hand. And so she chose two contrasting colours typically, and if you go up and have a look at her paintings, it's got that zigzag effect, hasn't it? And that for her is the lightning. And here's the weird thing. When I was interviewing her about the painting on that particular day in Kintore in 2011, but it could have been 2013. I'll say 2013. It was raining. She said, see, the last story but one is behind the screen. So behind the screen is the film Benny and the Dreamers, and there's a handout which you should really take with you if you can. So Benny and the Dreamers is a film which the Pintupi people initiated and had made to tell their version of their history in their own words. And in fact, and you'll see on the little brochure, when a group of men, including Mick Namarari, Ronnie Tjapaltjarri, who's just over there, and some others, went into Alice Springs to a film production place and said, we want to do our story, they were told by one of the producers, but the story of Western Desert people and Pintupi people has already been told a number of times, and it had been, but they said, not by us. Well, that was gotcha. And so they initiated the production of that film, and they oversaw the values that went into the film and how it was made. And the narrators are Pintupi, and Mick Namarari is one of the key narrators. Ronnie Tjapaltjarri, whose paintings are here, is another narrator. His sister Yuya Nampajimpa, whose painting is down the back. If you walk straight down that corridor, you'll see her painting. She was another one, and there's others. It's the only way you're going to get to hear the artist speaking directly to you, because it's just too hard for them to come down to attend events like this. And so the film is a great way to see these people telling you their story in their own terms. So it's a very worthwhile resource. Now, I'm actually going to talk about one more painting, which is a black and white painting. And this is a good one to finish on, because this is one of the paintings that I just can't explain. This is George Jungarai, and so are the paintings on either side of him. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see those, remember I talked about alternating lines that the women did? They did lines and then filled them with dots. Here's George on the left doing alternating lines, roughly parallel, but with little dents and bends occasionally, dark and light. Over on the right, he's not doing parallel lines, but he's still doing line work, colours which are a little bit closer to each other, to me, much softer, and he's forming squares or diamonds depending on how you look at it. And in the middle, I'm not sure what those shapes are. I've looked at the painting a lot. I can't work out how he did it. I can't work out where he started. I can't work out why he didn't mess part of it up, because he was just staring at it close up for so many hours that it addled his brain. If your eyes are like mine, you can't keep the painting still. And some people I know, if they were stuck in a room, would get a headache. So in terms of artists having an impact, artists creating an effect, that's a great example. I'm just not sure what I think about it, or how I kind of perceive it, because my eye just keeps being taken all over the place into these little corners and bends and lines and shapes, and then they disappear into the centre and another line goes off somewhere else. So if you want to have some fun after we close, see if you can work out if there's a line somewhere on that painting that tells you how he started to build a structure. because one of the ways that a lot of these paintings are structured is that the artist lays down what they refer to as a drawing, and if the painting's on a red canvas, which that one is, then black would be a typical colour to do a drawing with. Like Kim's lines on her painting, her thin lines are black, and her infill is coloured dotting. George he's using black and white at the same time, so I'm a bit lost as to which one was a kind of a drawing and which one was a kind of an infill. On other paintings, it's much more apparent. Anyway, that can just be a good note to finish on. So I'll say thanks very much for listening, and I hope you got some interesting things out of my stories. Thanks very much for today.